Good evening, my fellow citizens. This government, as promised,
I have ordered attacks on enemy military
targets. There could be no greater good than the quest for peace, and no finer purpose than the preservation of freedom.
You didn't come home to your family in San Diego, you came home to Yokosuka, Japan.
It's an amazing country with an amazing, deep, rich culture. I fell in love with it.
While we were in Yokosuka, we made an effort to connect with the local community, and so I knew how much they loved the ship. All these shipyard workers lined up in white coveralls and white hard hats, and they would run up that brow to go to work.
The Navy made a decision very rapidly, particularly after the conclusion of Operation Desert Storm. Another carrier would go out to Japan to take up the mantle, and the Midway would be brought back home and promptly put into decommission. And so she really had a quick track to wind up going to a scrapyard. You can imagine there's a whole mix of emotions going on, as well as what Japanese expectations were. They were accustomed to working with Midway. They're the ones that maintained her. They're the ones that modified her. So she was very much a part of their experience as well.
One thing I do remember as we transited between Japan and Hawaii is we stopped at the site of the Battle of Midway and had a ceremony remembering what had happened there in 1942.
It was her first time in, I think, 22 years that she had been back to stateside.
When you're coming home from a cruise, they have a thing called a Tiger Cruise, we call it. And in Hawaii, which was our first port of call, we turned over the mission in the Pacific to another carrier, USS Independence. And we brought on board a bunch of our Tigers, young folks and dads and uncles, and to come and see what we do. And the first port of call, and I got to pick that, was Seattle.
General Colin Powell was the only person who sat in my chair on my carrier while we were underway. And so from there down to San Diego, we did an air show every day, just for the heck of it. We came through around Point Loma, and there's a breakaway song that you play every time you do an underway replenishment, and it's Copland's Theme for a Common Man. I still get tears in my eyes. Coming by Point Loma, it's echoing off of the hills. And I don't know what the people thought, but the crew was emotional. This ceremony was absolutely perfect. And I don't know how many people were there, but it was probably 10,000 or more. I mean, it was packed.
And even George Gay himself, who was still alive, he was there to christen the Midway at the beginning of her life in 1945, and here he is at the end of her career in 1992. So it really was a major media event with lots of sentiment.
Every place you could see was a white sailor standing shoulder to shoulder all around the ship. And I'm coming off the ship, but that haunting, excuse me, It still gets to me after all these years. So yes, that's the heart coming out of the ship. Saluted and walked off the ship.
Born in war, she is retiring in peace, and that's an enviable accomplishment for any warship.
An entrepreneur, Alan UK, first came up with the idea, and he recruited a number of us, sharing his vision of Midway as a museum with San Diego to generate public support, donations, as part of the regulatory process. There were a number of OMG moments. It had been sitting, out in the Pacific Northwest for ultimately 12, 14 years. Something like 50 tons of catapult machinery was stored on the hangar deck. Very few lights worked. No restrooms. And then you go up on the flight deck and it's covered with rusting 28-ton anchors. Pelican guano, seagulls have been there nesting for 12 years. You could clearly see cracks through the seams of the flight deck, so you just knew that rainwater, had been seeping into the carrier for more than a decade, and God knows what that was going to require inside. I think the first walk down that flight deck, stepping around all that stuff, was probably the biggest oh my God moment for many of us. I think about sports and opening day and all that goes in the off season and so on. Well, for us, it'd been 12 and a half years leading up to opening day. That day when we opened first week in June, I was down here, many of us were down here very early in the morning. I remember on the flight deck pacing, and it's almost like the delivery room. And I remember looking down, we were gonna open, I believe, at 9 or 10 in the morning. And by 7 a.m., there were people in line.
We literally had a line that started where the modern ticket booth is on the pier, going down the length of the pier, across the width, and more than halfway across the back length, just to get a ticket. And then even on board, we still have a picture of people lining the entire width of the flight deck just to have their chance to get inside to see the bridge.
We went from 0 miles an hour for 12 years to literally full speed 7 days a week as a museum.
I was confident that this would be a success. I was just amazed at just how much of a success it turned out to be. For 17 years, though, she very rapidly became a part of the landscape to the point where even just a few years in, everybody always assumed the Midway was always here.
It's a place that is just inspiring. People walk aboard, their jaw either drops, they say, oh my God, or something a little more graphic than that. Sometimes they even begin whispering without even knowing why. Everyone comes away inspired, I think, and often surprised at their inspired that they take back home, whether it's to San Diego or Akron or Pensacola, and they can't wait to share it with their friends and family. And so to think about it coming from the mothball fleet of Bremerton to San Diego and bringing back to life Midway magic is something we're extremely proud of.